In today's behind the scenes segment, we're going to talk about ROCS.
What kind of rocks?
ROCS.
Oh, not that kind of rocks.
You know what? I forgot what it stands for, actually. But it's a New Jersey-based Porsche shop that does this cool thing with older 911s. They turn them into hot rods and these outlaw-style rides.
Wow.
Very New Jersey style. So what you do, you take a perfectly good, like, 70s, mid-70s 911.
Yeah.
And you just strip it and you weather it and you scratch it and you
Really?
like bang it and you yank everything that you possibly can out to get it down to pretty much a bare metal outlaw look, they call it. So we had an opportunity in a fall time to work with a production company that was working on a documentary about this very special car. It was like a mid-70s 911 SC with a little newer motor, like a 90s motor in it, done up as an outlaw. It was this silver beauty, and we got to chase it around the streets of Jersey City. And when I say streets, this is what made this unique. It's outlaw, right? So the thing is I'm not gonna say it's all banged up. It's a really, really cool car.
Still nice looking.
I'm a big fan. It just looks right. They do it. They don't overdo it. So we picked a very special place. Unlike all the other car shoots, maybe a racetrack or in a city or out in a country, this was literally just the docks, and we're in this old warehouse area with just garbage flying around and all kinds of graffiti. And it was an interesting location. We had Jersey City PD there. We had 2 officers with us throughout the day because we're flying drones over these like side streets and alleys, and we spent about half a day under this overpass. It wasn't really an overpass. There was no traffic on it. It was just this like elevated roadway that was attached to this old abandoned warehouse with these cool alleys around it, and we had so much fun in those chasing this thing around. So it was me and Mike who did that. Mike was the pilot for us, and I was the camera operator. We started day outside, so it was nice and easy. We got into the sync. We actually had a problem with the first Inspire. We used the Inspire Pros then with the X5s, and I didn't have the 25 mil yet, so 15 mil, the standard DJI. And luckily we always take 2 machines for a shoot like this because stuff can go wrong. And we lost the HDMI downlink, the video downlink on the first flight. We're setting it up, and literally like a second shoot in, done, no signal, and it was like a gimbal connection problem. So we took out the second machine. Now we're down to 1. Now the anxiety kicks in, right? Can't crash. And the whole idea of this, we closed down the streets and regulated the traffic, was to get lower, closer, and faster with the Porsche. So as usual for these shoots. So I think the value of the drones in the 2 operator setup for these kinds of shoots is the ability to pull off these shots. It's not the high-up aerials, and there are some really good uses of high-up aerials. We used a bunch of top-downs in this shoot, and that's good. But you know what? Most of our time was spent within 10 feet from the ground with this thing, and usually like 3-4 feet off the ground, just chasing it around.
And moving fast.
Ooh,
nervous.
So we started our day in the open sky just to get a bit practice, and that's how we got in tune. And I'll talk on the show with Mike a little bit more about the 2 operator setups, and hopefully we can have a little conversation about what we have going, but we're pretty well tuned. We work well as 2 operator team now, especially with the Inspire 2. I wish we had that for this shoot, but eventually we moved from the open sky flying to this overpass, and this was made out of steel. The whole thing is just steel beams and ironwork. And we got to the point where we're trying to come up with, once we got bored of chasing it up and down the road and making the turn just like a 3, 4, 5 different angles of the turn, we were trying to get something to parallax. And you're under a steel bridge, and what better thing to get to parallax is than those steel beams. So we're really flying in these tiny sidewalks on the sides of alleys on the opposite side of the beams that are, holding up the overpass, chasing this thing at like 35, 40 miles an hour.
Oh my God.
Mike's flying away from himself, and it's really narrow there, and you have all kinds of compass errors going on because we're like passing the steel structures. So quite often the camera would just like yank to the right or to the left just on its own, because the One Pro took the heading reference of the camera from I still have to test this with the Inspire 2, but the compass, as soon as that got compromised, the heading of the camera would change, so it would compromise the shot. We were down to 1 machine, so we're like, gotta be careful with this, and we came close quite a few times to like smashing into a steel beam there. especially when it's a long linear chase shot and a compass error kicks in and all of a sudden the thing's kind of wobbly or changes direction. There were a few moments where it was kind of difficult. Luckily, we had the road closed and we kept the rest of the crew because he also had a ground crew there behind us and away from the drone for that part of the shoot. Another challenging thing that I do want to touch on that was difficult about this shoot is we were dealing with the difficult light conditions because you're usually shooting or following the car that's in the dark, but somewhere at the end of the dark or on the outside of it, you have a bright outdoors. And to get this right, I relied heavily on the aperture priority. We touched on this in, I think, episode 3, episode 2, one of those. Real quick, the aperture priority, when you have a challenging conditions, when your exposure changes rapidly from bright to dark, from dark to bright, you're better off just locking your aperture and roughly about midway where your shutter speed is about double your frame rate and then leaving it right there. Because if you deviate from this 180-degree rule a little bit, it's not a huge deal. Don't do it. Use the manual if you're shooting something from really up close in a dark place. What I do, I sacrifice the frame rate. So before pushing the ISO over 200, I'll drop the frame rate to like 24 frames per second. And once you do that, stuff tends to blur out a little bit naturally. So if it's something that's moving really fast, I wouldn't recommend doing the aperture priority because then you're allowing the shutter speed to drop to like 1/25th, and that's really you're gonna have stuff blurred out. So unless that's a look that you're looking for, you're better off either using 30 frames per second only, and if it gets down to 1/30th, just be ready to deal with some choppiness a little bit, not jitter, but it will just kind of smudge out the frames. If you're using the Inspire tool or anything that you can set a flatter profile on, I would just leave it in manual. So hopefully that makes sense. Those were the challenges that we encountered: tight spaces, compass errors all over the place. And let's talk a little bit more about those. So if we, obviously the compass, why do you need a compass on the aircraft, right?
You're right. Yeah.
It sets the heading. It basically tells aircraft which way it's heading. So every time there is a compass error, the aircraft doesn't know which way it's pointed, and it's very difficult for it to make that reference. Now, some of the newer ones that actually have the ground vision cameras, they started using a visual compass, so they started using the ground as a reference, so for heading of the aircraft.
An interesting method.
Yeah. Have you noticed on the Inspire 2, if you start it on some metal object, like we did a shoot on the railroad trestle, and the whole thing is made out of metal, so I would turn it on, the compass would calibrate to its environment. But as soon as I flew away from the trestle, I would get a compass error, and it will switch automatically to vision positioning, because that's how it keeps its reference, and it won't let you fly. It will let you land, but you won't get out of the vision positioning until you rectify the issue. With the Inspire 1, also, one of the things to worry about is when you're starting the drone for the first time, if you're shooting on a bridge or under the bridge or near, try to keep it away from steel as possible.
Oh, yeah. I almost lost an Inspire 2 to that.
Yeah, and if you're on the bridge, use like a case, put it on top of the case, and then start it, and just make sure that when the compass self-calibrate, when the machine powers on, it's actually in an interference-free environment, because you could have a problem. All right, so that was our Porsche shoot. Lower, closer, faster.
And the link is going to be in the show notes?
I'm going to embed it on a blog, and I'm going to put a link on the show notes. I put a quick reel together where you can check out some of these shots. Some of them are really low. If you guys are into Porsche vehicles and cool cars, look for ROCS. They are all over social media. I'm also going to put a link in the show notes. Hopefully I don't forget, because sometimes I do. Well, anyway, if you guys have any questions or comments about a two-operator flying or chasing cars, you can leave them on our blog, or you can leave them on a YouTube channel.